Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on how not to quantize results, how you can and should analyze code frequencies effectively. Code frequencies, that is turning codes into numbers, turning coded segments into numbers, reporting on numbers, is something we see a lot with MAXQDA. And as a trainer and research consultant, I often see it and I think, I'm sorry you did it this way. You could have done it another way. Or often I get asked, how should I set up my numbers so that they mean something? And this webinar is here for you so that you understand what you need to know and what pitfalls you need to avoid when you're working with code frequencies. When we take a look at MAXQDA, it is a software, so much you certainly know, that is primarily used for coding data. Coding means basically on a technical level, it means labeling data with certain keywords. We can call this process coding, categorizing. The resulting codes, we can call codes, categories, tags, frameworks, whatever you like. But in the end, what happens is we have some codes, we have certain labels with text, and we assign them to the data, to data segments, usually text. And what comes out of this is that you can retrieve data, but what automatically happens, and it's what's very tempting in MAXQDA, are the numbers here. You immediately get, MAXQDA keeps count for you what codes are common, what codes are rare, which codes you have used over and over and over and over again, and what code you have forgotten about weeks ago. And these codes can play an important role in reporting your results, but they can also sometimes be a bit misleading. And in both directions, we will today take a closer look. I already mentioned that we mostly work by coding text, but MAXQDA also allows us to code text, image, audio, and video data. In text, we select a text segment, certain characters from until. With images, we can draw up a rectangular selection and assign a code to this one. And with audio and video files, we can code a certain track on a time track, like from second 10 to second 21. And this is important because no matter if you code 3 words, half an image, 5 minutes, or 3 seconds, all will count as one coded segment in MAXQDA. So numbers, quantitizing data, is sort of the great equalizer. But the question is, what do these numbers then actually mean? Can you compare 5 minutes in a video to 3 words in the text? MAXQDA will tell you, yes, it's 1 and 1. I can count this. But of course, you always need to be aware what is behind your numbers. So what will we do today? I will first tell you a little bit about what quantitizing data means, what happens when we turn text into numbers. And then we will take a look at 3 more and more detailed ways of working with code frequencies: subcode statistics, which also holds true for code frequencies, comparing groups, cross tables, and if we have some time left, I will show you an alternative by taking a look at code coverage. So, quantitizing data. Quantitizing means that you turn something that is a qualitative element that has like unique properties and meaning into a number. This is in our case text. We take a text segment and we count this as 1. But you could also quantize all kinds of things. You could say I have 5 apples. You turn the apples into the number 5, although one apple is big, the other one is small, one is sweet, the other one is foul, but all of them are 5 apples. There is also the opposite way of qualitizing data. That can be if you say Andreas, name Andreas, age 33, I don't know, born in 1991, then you can qualitize this quantitative information by saying Andreas is a man who was born in 1991, for example. But what we will look at now is quantitizing data. That means we have qualitative information and we turn it into numbers. What happens there when we do this? When we code our data, when we assign labels to our data, two things are happening from a methodological level, speaking from a methodological perspective. One is for example, here we have the code taking care of children, and we assign it here. By assigning this, we create coded segments. That means we create units of meaning for a qualitative analysis. We say, for example, this is a sentence about childcare, about taking care of children. And you will want a unit of meaning that's, well, meaningful, that you can interpret, analyze, that you can then retrieve, think about, show to your colleagues, show to your supervisor, discuss, quote in your paper. You want a unit of meaning from your data that's helpful to you, whatever that means. And that will be something, sometimes it will only be a word, sometimes it will be a sentence, sometimes it will be paragraphs, but you create a certain meaningful element, meaningful segment. The second thing is you create a segment for quantitizing data. You create a unit that is counted as 1. And these two things, creating units for counting and creating units of meaning for interpreting them, are sometimes a bit in conflict. Because here, for example, we have 3 segments taking care of children. These are 3 segments that are meaningful in themselves. I decided these are 3 units of meaning, but this also means they are equal to the number 3. I could have made one big segment. This would have changed my meaningful unit, but it would also have reduced the number of coded segments from 3 to 1. So already how big you create these segments has quite some impact on what you count and how frequent things are. And as a very rough rule of thumbs, when you are more interested in qualitatively analyzing your data, in interpreting your data, then you will usually give preference to creating meaningful units of meaning for interpretation. And they will usually be a bit larger so that you have enough context to understand the segment outside of its context. And if you are more interested in counting, you will be more strict with the size. You will try to standardize it. You will often try to keep it shorter because you want to count something persistently with a certain size. If one apple is this size and one apple is that size, then maybe it's misleading saying you get one apple and I get one apple. That's fair, right? So for quantitizing, we try to be more even with the segments we create. And it's totally legitimate to say I have certain codes in my data that are more targeted towards qualitative analysis, and I have codes that are more where I have more the interest of counting things. So that's a little bit basics on quantitizing data. What can we do when we have quantitized our data, when we have coded data? We can display, for example, code frequencies or subcode frequencies as a frequency table or a bar chart. Now I will move into MAXQDA and show you based on an example file, first of all, this tool, subcode statistics, but I will also show you some of the intricacies of it, the difficulties of it. Let's have a look together. MAXQDA is over here waiting for us. I am using here the MAXQDA pre-delivered example project. If you want to use this project, you can just go to Home, Open Project, Example Project, English, Work-Life Balance. You have it on your devices, so you can do the exact same steps as I do if you like to. You will have the same information, although I made some tiny tricks and tweaks to show some things, but in general, you can use the same functions. Maybe your first thought would be to analyze here the code frequencies. But actually, I find that I use code frequencies quite rarely, which means you can select here what codes you want to quantize, because often a code and its subcodes are then the usual unit of meaning or a unit of codes that you want to analyze. For example, I have here, and so we will look at subcode statistics. That's, in my opinion, one of the key quantitizing tools. I have here the code work-life balance, And it has certain subcodes. The work-life balance, mind you, the top code is empty. That's something that we often want when we quantitatively analyze our data. The label or the heading is empty, 0, because everything is neatly sorted into subcodes, in the subcodes of work-life balance. I can collapse this and it will sum it up. 135 segments are in here. 24 of them are about education, 41 are about friends and family, 12 segments are about work-life separation, and so on and so on. We can display this, or maybe first about these numbers. These numbers here tell us how many coded segments we have. If I retrieve the data, here, for example, let's take domestic work 7. If I retrieve that, I get exactly 7 segments. See that here. I can retrieve them via that retrieved segments window. If you don't know how to do that, getting started session is great on these little details. 7 segments. I can change the meaning of these numbers, actually. Many people don't know that. You can go here to the settings and say the displayed frequency, what should it tell me? Here, by default, it's the coded segments in all documents. But you could also say, show me in how many documents a code occurs. And that's already a different judgment. So if I say documents here, then my numbers drop. And I see that the code education comes up in 10 documents and the code friends and family in 11 documents. So you can already here change what you want to see. Usually you will go between coded segments and documents. We now open up the subcode statistics. You can trigger subcode statistics under here, codes, subcode statistics, but I much prefer to do it my way. I right-click here on work-life balance and then just say subcode statistics. Now I have to choose basically what we had before. What should be the unit of our analysis? Documents, the most frequent code per document. Let's not worry about this for now. Coded segments, and only in the activated documents, yes or no. Let's, for now, just go with the default coded segments. And the numbers that you get are exactly the same numbers as we have them here in the code system. You see here, education 24, 24, 41, 41. But they are sorted by frequency. That already makes it a bit better. And we also have here the percentages. So we see, for example, here that 30% of all codes within work-life balance are about friends and family. So we get like some internal percentage for this code, which is often very helpful, especially if you have like scales or something. I can just click here on chart view and I will get this as a chart. With the chart, we have various options. Of course, we can make it big and small. We can change the colors. Most importantly, we can here choose between different display options for the chart. A bar chart, horizontal and vertical, or a pie chart. Actually, for me, this one here is my favorite layout because it's very easy to read. And you can also see here then the words, the names of the codes are clearly displayed. So if I, for example, change to this one here, yeah, it's a bit, for me, it's not as intuitive. I almost always use this one. And if you're a fan of a pie chart, then you probably value aesthetics more than things being easily readable. Because if I turn away the numbers here, could you tell me which of these is the biggest? Probably not. So there's a big argument actually against pie charts because we humans are really not good in judging angles. If I go here, even without numbers, you are pretty good in telling which one is the most frequent and second and so on. Okay, but that's building charts that has not too much to do with frequencies. So let's keep in mind what we get here. Friends and family is definitely our top code, 41 segments, 24 in education, free time and self-care, 21. Now I will trigger this again and say, you know what? I'm not interested in coded segments because the problem with counting coded segments is if I mention a topic 5 times and you never mention it, we mention it 2.5 times on average. So a single person who or document who pushes a code a lot can make the code seem much, much bigger than it actually is. Let's go to subcode statistics for this purpose again. And now let's say we want to see documents. Documents, okay. Now we see here the documents, and suddenly we have 11, 10, 10, 10, 9, 5, 5. And if we take the chart view, it looks something like this. 100%, all of the documents here under work-life balance here contain the word friends and family, all the documents that have at least one of these codes, but not too important right now. Education, just in 10. Typical workday in 10. Free time and self-care also in 10. So education, typical workday, and free time and self-care, they look equally important here, 10, 10, 10. But if we take a look here, we see education is 24 segments. A typical workday is 16. Free time and self-care is 21. So we see already by what we look at, documents or coded segments, we get a different perspective. Also, the gap between friends and family with 41 segments and typical workday with 16. Well, this is in talking in segments, this looks like a much bigger gap than we have here in documents. The documents tell us if several documents at least once mention this code. It doesn't tell us anything about if the code comes over and over and over and over again. And both perspectives are important. Because, for example, here, childcare, we have 14 segments, and typical workday, we have 16 segments. The same amount of segments, but here only 5 documents talk about childcare, and all of the documents talk about the typical workday, so, or almost all of them. So this is a different perspective. And so now you see how we get into the intricacies of reporting code frequencies. And if you see a bar chart, and if you use a chart like this, you must definitely tell your audience, is this coded segments or is this documents we are talking about? Usually I can tell, but not everyone can tell. So let's keep an eye on that and report it. Here we have these based on documents or coded segments. This question, document or coded segments, or even percentages, will come back to us again. So this is taking a look at code frequencies. You can do the same with just as an example, just to look at the time, okay? Just as an example, I can say here code frequencies and can just say I want to compare this code with this code with this code, and I basically get the same options here. You are just free to choose where the codes are coming from, but it always is a question of, do the codes form like a meaningful group? Usually subcodes are very helpful and clear here. Now let's say, okay, here work-life balance, that's interesting, and we for now will stick with them, but we want to have more nuance. We want to see if documents are different, if there are certain patterns in the frequencies. I will now go to compare cases and groups, quantitative, and take a look at 2 groups. The first one is Berlin. The second one is Hamburg. Those are interviews from 2 groups of documents. I will again pick all the work-life balance codes and I will compare them. I hit OK, and by default, it looks something like this. If you take a look at this, you can turn on, if it's not turned on, activated here, the heat map or the background color for cells. It really helps me a lot in reading. And we can take a look at the numbers here. Now you see the total is no longer the same as here, 24, 14, because there are other documents in here too. But we see here, we have education in Berlin 4 times, we have education in Hamburg 10 times. In total, 14. Here we have 19 to 18, 5 to 6, 3 to 4, 7 to 7, 8 to 8, 6 to 9. And we, on a first glance, I would say there doesn't seem to be a big difference. And now when you think about it, why should it make a big difference if the interview participants live in this or that German city? do we assume that work-life balance in Berlin is better than in Hamburg? I would not assume that. Maybe could be, but I would not have any idea in my head why it would be that way. And this is a thing that I manipulated quite a little bit. What's the problem with this crosstab if you present it this way? If you get an idea, you can write it in the chat. What's a key problem in presenting the data this way? So the problem here is, or at least one thing you should be aware of, and this I manipulated to make you aware of this, and this happens all the time. We have here 4 documents that are in the group Berlin and 6 documents in the group Hamburg. So the numbers 7 and 7, they don't mean the same. Because here, we also see here the number of segments. We have 52 segments within 4 documents in Berlin, 62 segments within 6 documents in Hamburg. The 7 and 7 look equal here, the 8 and 8 too, but they are not. Because here it's 7 out of 52 and here it's 7 out of 62. What can we do to get around this problem? We can take a look at relative percentages, or percentages. We have 2 options here, 3 basically, row and column percentages. In the compare groups, I would always go for column percentages. That means it will then tell us 7 out of 52, 7 out of 62. Let's have a look. Now we see percentages here. The percentages here help us to even out the problem of, to some degree, of unequal sized groups. If you have a group with 2 and a group with 20 documents, if you take column percentages, it's still gonna be kind of okay. You still have some other problems, but it will at least be somewhat comparable. And now we see, here we have 7.7%, 16.1%. 7.7 means 7.7% of all codes within work-life balance are about education. That's how you would read that. Not 7.7% of all my codes out there, because 24 is definitely more than less than 7% of 840. Here, we just take a look at, and that's what we get here. This is 7% here. So let's have a look again. It was this one, 7% here means 4 out of 52. That's roughly 7%. 5 would be 10%. So this is what we get here with column percentages, 4 out of 52. And this makes it a bit better comparable. Now we see that the 8 and 8 translates to 15.4 to 12.9%. So here already, this can help us to get around the problem of frequencies a little bit. Now, again, we still have the problem, what we have mentioned earlier, that there might be one person in there who talks 20 times about friends and family, or 19 times about friends and family, and the other 3 don't talk about it at all. And this person suddenly gives the impression that this is a huge topic for everyone. What we can do with this is that we get another perspective in, we count the documents again. And this is the 4th option here, that the column percentages tell us in what percentage of documents this code appears. And here we have our, let's do this for the 10 interviews. Here we have our 10 interviews from the 2 groups, those 4 and 6. Here we see that everyone in Hamburg, 100% of the people, at least once mention education. In Berlin, it's 75%. That means, if we look back at the number, 1 person doesn't talk about education in Berlin. That's not a huge difference. It's 1 person forgot to talk about education, maybe. I even know it's Riley, but that's a different story. Friends and family, everyone talks about it. Childcare, it's 50-50. 2 out of 2 do here, 3 out of 3 do here. Domestic work, 2 out of 2, 3 out of 3. So we see here what we maybe saw earlier. If we have a difference here, for example, with education, we notice it's just 1 person not talking about it. And when you compare frequencies and observe an effect, it's helpful to try these different options, take different perspectives, coded segments, column percentages, percentage of documents. And if the effect keeps being relevant, then it's quite likely that there's a real effect behind it, and it's not only statistical noise. So that's one of the important things when considering frequencies. So what we've learned here is, first, segments versus documents is important. That was with the code frequencies. Here we see unequally sized document groups are important. And I said that the percentages help us here to get around this problem of the group sizes, but it only helps us to some degree, because what always happens is if you have one long document and one short document, of course, the long document will have more segments than the short document, but the long document will also cover a wider range of topics than the short document. So it will always seem that the longer documents and the bigger groups have a more nuanced view than small groups or short documents. That you will very quickly see, but this is not telling you anything about your participants. Maybe that they didn't have so much time to talk, but these are things you should really be aware of when you work with frequencies. One important thing here too is, if I have my segments here, and that's a thing that I really love about MAXQDA as a mixed methods function, as a mixed methods software, is if I say here, I have 4 statements about education in Berlin, I can double click on this 4, and MAXQDA will give me the 4 segments. So I can read them, I can check them, I can see if they are right. I can even switch here with one click at the segment matrix to a qualitative comparison. Qualitative is just one click away. I love that. I click it and you will see how it looks. I do one click and then, sorry, wrong window. This one here comes up and I make it a bit smaller, that you see this is the same information, but here we now have the statements next to each other. So always think about the statements, what they say. We'll give you another example of this in just a second. What we can also do is not only use document groups, you can also use so-called document sets. I'm going to delete those 2. I created them because I wanted to show something, but you don't need them. By default, we here have 2 sets. Sets are groupings of documents, and a document can belong to as many sets as you want to. For example, I have here a set respondents with children and respondents without children. And we see we have 5 interview participants with and 5 without children. Now let's do the same thing again, but not with places, but with has children, has no children. I go to quantitative and I compare the same codes, the same 10 documents, mind you, no new documents. It's just a different grouping. Without children, with children. Same 10 documents, differently grouped. And let's see if we see something here. And now what would be the assumption? Do you think it has an impact on your work-life balance, whether you have children or not? I would assume that this has a bigger effect, definitely a bigger effect than Hamburger Berlin. And what we see here is, okay, well, we can again, and this is how I would do this. You go through it line by line. You say education, here's a little bit more. Friends and family, there's a bit more. This looks similar. Here's something happening, similar. So these are only segments now. And we see again, the segments are not quite comparable. Here there are 5 and 5 documents, but 46 to 68. So let's go again for percentages to make that clearer. And now we begin to see some effects. Those are the same 10 documents, just grouped differently. Education, the group without children, 19.6% of their statements about work-life balance are about education. The respondents with children, 7.4% of their statements are about education. So this is quite some difference. And then here, work-life separation, all right. And childcare, here we have 0%. No one without children talks about childcare, and 20% of the people with children talk about childcare. This might not surprise you in content-wise, but it is still something we can definitely show with frequencies. And let's just keep an eye out here on childcare. If I look at it like this, or even here, this effect will stay up. People with children talk about childcare. you could do the math, but this would be a significant difference, or this would be a meaningful difference. You cannot do a t-test with 5 and 5. That's a different question, or different paradigm. But definitely there is a pattern here. And if we take a look here at the frequencies, we see that also the people without children talk more about education. So it seems that there is something happening, whether you have children or not, with education, with the topic of family, and with childcare. Something is happening here. And when we take a look here at the segment matrix again, and this is important. If you take a look at education, I here have 9 segments and here 5. But if you take some time to read the segments, you will figure out that there's not only a difference in quantity, but there's a difference in what they say. The people without children talk about, I'm still studying, I will study something new, I'm going to university twice a week. And the people with children usually talk about whether they have educational opportunities at their job. Do they get professional training at their job? Because surprise, they are older, they are not students anymore. Education is differently involved in their life than for younger students who don't have children. And these differences you will see as soon as you look into the segments and the data. So even a segment that has roughly the same frequency can have a totally different meaning if you look at the meaning. So don't forget meaning over quantity. Although, of course, you can show also some quantitative effects. And how I like to use quantities in my reports, in my papers, is I usually use them as a starting point. I say, here I have the following codes. The following ones were common, those were rare, those were exclusive to this group, those were exclusive to that group. And now let me tell you what the content of these codes is. But it should not be the end. It should rather be the beginning of showing your results. So that's comparing groups. We can get even more nuanced than this. And you see now we come from a very wide look at code frequencies to comparing groups. And now we get even more fine-grained. You might remember, if you have been to any previous webinars about it, that we have document variables in MAXQDA. Document variables are metadata about the documents. For example, let's take a look at our 10 documents here. Oops. Sorry. What is my screen doing? Help me. Okay. I almost killed MAXQDA, but it caught itself. That's my 2-screen problem. So here I have my 10 documents. And then we see here, this person is single, in a partnership. What degree do they have? How old are they? We see somewhere age in years here, 37, 28, 22, 42, 31. Do they have children? How many? How motivated are they? These are document variables that's additional information that we have about our documents. If you don't know where this is coming from, Getting Started or Mixed Methods webinar is your friend. And what we can do now is we can take these work-life balance codes and split them up, the code frequencies, split them into a cross table based on variable values. Let's have a look how this works. Again, I take the same 10 documents. Mixed methods, cross tab. And what I will take here is I clear the list again for you. I will say I want to compare them by the number of children. And I would already, if you want to, you can make a guess in the chat. Who do you think will talk the most about children? People with no children, 1, 2, 3 or more. You can leave a guess in the chat. I will set this up here. We have people with 0 up to 5 children. I say 1, 2, 3, and then larger or equal than 3. 3 or more, says someone in the chat. 3 or more is your guess. I will lock it in for you. 0, 1, 2, 3. It's just 10 people, so it's not a significant effect, but still. People with the most children, says another one. Okay. And here now it gets really interesting. We can test this. I mean, it's just 10 documents, but you know the sentiment. We hit OK. And let's look at the raw numbers first. What do we have here? People with no or one child, no child. If you talk a lot about childcare with no child, you're probably me, because I love my niece and nephew. People with one child here, at least in here, absolute numbers. People with one children have 10 statements here. Then here we have 2, and then we have 3 or more. We can take a look at here at percentages, and the effect still keeps up. Here at least, but it's just 3 people, 3 people, 1 person, 1 person. Still, there is the tendency here, the people who have 1 child talk the most about childcare. Probably you could argue now, well, if you have 1 child, it's a new experience for you. You still need to find your way with your work-life balance. If you have 3 children, you probably already have a good idea how you handle childcare. Because if not, maybe you got 3 at the time. This can happen. But if you get one after the other, you probably already have a bit of an idea what you're doing. But this is just to show you how we can make our analysis more fine-grained. And here, education, we can also take a look at how the education effect splits up. People with no children talk quite a bit about education. With 1, it's not much. With 2, a bit more. And with 3, it's then almost negligible, because how much time will you have for education when you have 3 children at home? 3 or more at home. So this is how you can take a more nuanced view. What you need for this, document variables. Document variables, you can do the same, for example, for if you do a literature review, you could say publication year or author or I don't know, type of peer review process or journal or whatnot. It's the same logic applies here. We can also take a look here at column percentages, and then my beautiful effect here will disappear, very likely. Because here with this option, we don't see a difference anymore. Why? Well, because everyone who has children talks about childcare. Even the people 1, 2, 3, everyone talks about it. But the people who talk the most about it, who keep coming back and again and again and again to that topic, here are the people with 1 child. Yeah, we can again here switch to the segment matrix, and then we could even give it a comparative reading. And then we see, what do the people with 3 children say? We divide that up a bit. My wife works in administration. I hope you divide that up a bit with 3 or more children, because if not, well, I mean, it's your decision, but someone then has to shoulder a lot if you don't divide it up a bit. So you can then see, for example, here how childcare practices differ depending on how many children you have. And maybe you find me in your sample and someone who hasn't children talks about childcare. All right, those are now crosstabs. And again, you see what makes up a coded segment is quite important. If you make 1 large segment, or if you break something up in 3 small segments, that has quite an impact. And again, you see what you need to report. If you use this table, you need to tell your readership, I calculated coded segments percentages per column. Because else people will say, like, why is it not 100% or something like that? And then you say, well, it doesn't work like that. And this setting, choosing between segments, counting documents only once, counting as percentage of columns, rows, and or percentage of documents, that will come up over and over and over and over and over again. Now you might say, you know what, co-accounting segments, I don't want to do it. I don't like it because it's ambiguous. I now have learned I shouldn't do it. And you totally can and should do it, because you can definitely say what are common topics that are widespread and everyone talks about it, what are niche topics that hardly anyone talks about, what are topics that are more or less exclusive to a certain group. If you take such a careful wording, you can do something with frequencies. Just don't obsess over 17 versus 19%. But you might say, I don't like counting segments. Is there an alternative way? And there is one, but it also has its own problems. So just as a quick recap here on the slide, subcodes, we had comparing groups, we had Also cross tables we used. Another way is analyzing code coverage. Code coverage means you don't count segments anymore, you count area, and area means length in characters. How many characters are there in a specific segment? So in this case, then 10 short segments and one long segment might have the same number of characters. And this gives you another interesting perspective that again has its own problems. We can sum up and compare the area of each document per code. That's also some interesting options. So we can then say how many characters or how many letters or words within that document talk about a certain code. And it gives us an idea how much space area a code covers. And I will give you an overview here, and we will compare this. I will change the settings here to coded segments in all activated. So here we now have the numbers for these two groups, because I want to compare now the segments to the code coverage. Yes, you can also do, there's a question in the chat, can you do code coverage on visual or audio data? Yes. And that's a good point there, because if you have a 10 minutes audio file and someone talks about something for 3 minutes, then it would be 30% coverage, for example. Very interesting option. Now let's get to code coverage, text, tables, and PDFs. And we want to break them up by, you know what, we don't want to break them up. Just say, yeah, let me check if that's the right settings. Yes. So now I get here the code coverage in percentage of the entire text. That means what percentage of the text within the interviews is about a certain code. We can even see it here as number of characters. Our whole text has 81,804 individual characters, all 10 interviews together. Roughly 40,000 of these characters were coded, so half of them were not even coded. And 42 were not coded, 42,000. And then we see here 4,000 characters were about education. So we can go here to percentages of coded of the entire text row. Let's go with coded for now. We would now see that 10% of the entire coded text within interviews are about education. And something interesting happens here, because I can sort this. No, I cannot sort this, but I can roughly follow this by frequency. And we will see that the code that covers 40% of all coded data, or compared to that, 20%, let's say 20%, 20% of the entire text in these 10 interviews is about friends and family, 19%, 20%. Friends and family with 37 segments is also our most frequent code. I'm not surprised, but have a look over here. Typical workday, 17%. It's almost as prominent or covers almost as much text as friends and family. Typical workday has only 16 segments. We would have totally underestimated this code based on the number of segments, but it covers a lot of text. So what does this mean? And this brings us back to what I taught you at the beginning. Sometimes you create units of meaning for qualitative analysis, and sometimes you create segments for counting. The typical workday in our interviews here is the question, please describe your typical workday. And people give a quite long response here, because they say, I stand up in the morning, and then I go to school, and then I teach my class, and then. And of course, we want, as qualitative researchers for interpretation, the entire day. We want to capture the entire day. And the entire typical workday is usually one unit, right? It's one day. It would not make much sense to break up the typical workday in 10 segments. Then it's not a typical workday. I don't know what it is then, but it's something else. That means typical workday is a more narrative type of code, where you create large segments to interpret the narrative. And if you look at code frequencies, this code will look small because it's just one segment. it's a segment that everyone addresses. So you have 100% of all documents, and it's a segment that covers a lot of area, here 17%. But it has a totally different value than the code friends and family, where people have lots of small segments spread all over the place because they keep coming back and back and back and back again to the topic of, oh, I wish I would have more time with my friends, but I don't, but I have time for my family. It's so hard to take time away from my family to my friends, and so on and so on and so on. This is a totally different code. And going only by segment frequency, coded frequency of coded segments or codes, or coverage. But these are two different stories. And the third story is, what is the meaning of it? Because is the typical workday important? Well, I asked them, please describe your typical workday, so I know they will say something about it. Friends and family, if this topic comes up without anyone thinking about it, without anyone asking for it, a frequency has a different meaning. So often what you see reflected in your frequencies is roughly your interview guideline, how many questions you ask about that, but also if people keep coming back to this topic. Here, for example, now childcare with 8% looks pretty small. Domestic work, 2%. That's the same image here. But here with friends and family, typical workday, we get a totally different perspective if we look at coverage. Because we see here, we have 15,000 characters about friends and family, 14,000 characters about typical workday. But if we take the two codes, and I will just do this as a to make my point even clearer. Where is it? It's under analysis. No, where did they put that? No, it's for some weird reason. Where is code comparison? There it is. Let's compare the two codes. Friends and family and typical workday. Okay, let's put them next to each other, and you will see these are totally different codes. You just see from the structure of it. Those are very long segments here on the right, and those are a huge number of small segments. These are different coding units, but that's necessary because these are different questions in different codes. So now I hopefully have shown you why analyzing code frequencies is something that you should always consider as one perspective on your data. You can take different perspectives, segments, absolute segments, row percentages, number of documents, percentage of documents, coverage, but they don't tell, it's not like one of these stories is true or not. These are different perspectives. And then there's always the, please read the statement, what's behind the statement point of view. What you definitely can do is say, is a code widespread in your data? Does everyone talk about it? Or is it a niche topic? That's something you can always tell. Or is someone pushing? One last thing, you can also, for example, take a look here at the code matrix browser, which is basically a cross table to some degree. Here with this table, you can also take a look who pushes a topic a lot. Chris is crazy about education. Chris is the one who talks most about education here. And we see here childcare is only a topic for some of the people. So be mindful, there are always multiple stories or perspectives that you see with code frequencies. Now I will give you my conclusion, and then there is still time for questions. So when you want to quantize data, now maybe you feel a bit unsure about this, but maybe you feel also now more confident in how you need to handle these codes. What is the key takeaway? First of all, how you code your data strongly impacts your quantitative analysis. If your code is a typical workday, or if your code is a friend and family type of code, will have a strong impact on quantities. Quantities never tell you the whole story. They only tell you a part of it and often give you an overview. Always consider, when you compare groups, how many documents a certain group has, and even how long these documents are, because you could have 5 and 5, but those are 2-hour interviews and those are half an hour interview, and they will give you a different story. Consider the length of your documents. They are often a long document has a strong impact on the code system, and a short document will not. You have to be aware of that. Don't overanalyze the frequency of very small samples. So if you have 2 versus 3, like below 5 documents, if you even do a frequency analysis at all, I will question it. If you have more than 30 documents, you definitely should do quantitative analysis with it. You can do a lot of nice things then. But I once did a thesis with just like a bachelor thesis with 3 interviews. I reported no numbers at all. None. Because why? It's just 3 documents. What is it going to tell me? Also, what I like to do is to play what if I missed one experiment. That means if I compare frequencies, and maybe it's 5 to 6, 5 segments to 6 segments, and now maybe accidentally I put one from the 6, but it should belong to the 5. Suddenly the interpretation of the result is reversed just because I moved one segment from one to the other. And there will always be a segment that you've missed. If one segment up or down changes your interpretation, it's not a solid interpretation. And the last thing, frequency is not necessarily equal to relevancy. The most frequent code is not necessarily the most relevant code. And I like to give this example. In a lot of research projects, that are sort of, we want to know how to do things better in our institution, in our hospital, in our school, in our classroom, in our retirement home. We ask people, interview them, and say, what are the biggest problems you face? And I can already tell you the most frequent problem mentioned by everyone. It will be, we don't have enough money, we don't have enough staff. Those 2 results are almost always the most frequent results in sort of institutional interventional research projects. Is this your most important finding? To say, well, they would need more money and more staff, then things would be better. Yes, everyone can do a better job with more money and more staff. If you would hire 3 MAXQDA trainers to give this webinar, it would probably be better. Maybe not, but you see my point. But then maybe you have one person who gives you one segment, and they say, you know what, if this person would come 1 hour later and then use this tool to do that, we could actually make it work. This statement is probably the more relevant statement than everyone asks for more money, because you can always throw money at the problem. But if you find a solution on how to use your existing resources better, this can be a very rare and well-hidden segment, but it can be the most relevant for your research because you found someone who has very unique insights. That doesn't mean that relevancy, that frequencies are not important. That doesn't mean it at all, but it means that you should be very careful in not overemphasizing them, especially not on small sample sizes. But at the same time, it's important to, if you have a code, take a look, is this code presented only by one person that is very loud and vocal and extensive, or is this something that everyone reports? Is this common sense, or is this a niche perspective? This sometimes qualitative researchers forget, and then they report, we need more money, but this was just one person saying that, and the rest was like, yeah, we're kind of doing okay. So that's it about quantitizing data. If you want to learn or want to reach out to me, you can always send me an email. I'm a one-person company. I'm a freelancer. If you want today's slides, please send me a quick email and I will send you the slides. They are sort of like a short handout too. I share my email again here in the chat. Just send me a quick email, slides please, and I drop you the slides.